Lovely. I'm going to move on and invite Peter Lester to introduce his presentation. Peter is an independent researcher based in Leicester, as well as being Mr. Lester. Peter, would you like to tell us a little bit about your work with archives and library exhibitions as spaces of wellbeing? And welcome to the webinar.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So as Diana said, my name is Peter Lester. I'm an independent researcher and archivist, and I've worked in archives for over 10 years. I recently completed a PhD at the School of Museum Studies at the University of Leicester, which examined the exhibition and display of archives. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus a little on some of the research that I've done around the display of archives and books. And so that's in both archives and libraries, and to focus in particular on their role as sites of well-being. So my perspective is very much from archives, but I feel that there is a strong overlap here between archives and books. And the case studies that I used for my PhD, and the one I'm going to talk about today, are about archival and literary material within broader library settings. So hopefully there will be, hopefully the talk will be of relevance and interest to everyone. So firstly, a little bit of theory that underpins some of the ideas that I'm going to talk about. It's very short. The theoretical premise for the ideas here are focused on space and how the spaces that we inhabit and occupy are created and experienced. And to help with this, I've used the work of Henri Lefebvre, and this slide gives a very brief overview of a very small aspect of his work. So Lefebvre's theory rests on the notion that space is produced by society. Social relationships and experiences shape space, but space also in turn shapes them. So in other words, space is not neutral, like an empty backdrop against which life is played out, but is in fact something active, shaped and in turn shaping how experience happens. And Lefebvre termed this new understanding of space as social space. And I think this idea of social space helps us to think about archives and libraries in different ways, including as spaces of well-being. So I'm going to use a case study of Archives Plus in Manchester in the UK. And Archives Plus is a partnership of archive services based in Manchester Central Library, which you can see on the screen here. And it saw the bringing together of several archives into a single location and the creation of a large interpretation space, including an exhibition, as its main public offer. And it opened to the public in 2019. A key theme that emerges from a discussion about Archives Plus is the relationship between the archive and the user. Many of the discussions and planning around the project, which included extensive consultation, focused on the kind of experience that visitors wanted. There was a concern that a lot of people can feel uncomfortable or intimidated walking into a library or archive space, especially where they need to articulate a purpose, register to access material and explain themselves to the staff. And that's very much the case in many archives. And all of this is bound up in the space of the library or archive. So we may have spaces with registration desks that people have to approach, lockers that people have to go and use, invigilation desks where staff are watching people. The space could be very quiet. There may be security guards moving around it. Even the architecture of the building can all influence and shape these experiences. There's also a sense that people have to conform with a particular way of behaving, of using archives for research and study. So at Archives Plus, there was an attempt to reframe the space of the library and archive in a different way. And this was embodied in a shift away from thinking about archives as a resource to thinking about audiences with an interest and a purpose. What is it that people want to do when they come into the archive? And this idea emerged in the design of the space at Archives Plus. So in the image that we have here, we've just walked into Archives Plus through one of the main entrances. The main part of Archives Plus takes the form of this open access space in which visitors are invited to engage with archival and local history material in a number of different ways. And these include the interpretive exhibition, part of which we can see here. There are also the video pods, which are in these round spaces, and they have access to film and sound material. And then there is also a local study space, which you can see on the left-hand side of this image. There are other study spaces for microform and original archives that are located deeper in the building. And the whole of the space is open on one side to the library's entrance, elevators and stairs. And you can just see that at the back on the right-hand side. And then in the center of this image, you can also see the cafe, which is a key feature of the space. And there's also a small shop as well. So a key feature of this arrangement is how the designers, Mather and Co, blended the exhibition with the cafe, as can be seen here, rather than actively separating them. And they installed tabletop projections onto the cafe tables. So a key idea is that visitors feel comfortable coming into the library or archive and can engage with and experience archives and books in an informal or comfortable way. So there are no barriers and regulations in this part of the space, and there's an idea of supporting people to engage with the collections if they want. So the space then is designed with the well-being of the visitor in mind, and it was underpinned by the concept of the third place, a philosophy deliberately harnessed by the library's management to move the whole of the central library away from the traditional image of walls full of books to a place for people to come together to learn, create, and enjoy. So the third place is a concept that was first coined by the American urban sociologist Ray Oldenburg in 1989 to define a realm of experience that is as distinct as place as home or office. So according to Oldenburg, American society at that time had few social spaces that you could compare to the English pub, the French cafe, the German Biergarten, or the Viennese coffee house, these examples he gives. The third place was a space that offered an alternative social space, a physical place rooted in stimulation and creativity, in forms of affiliation and association, and that can contribute to individual and communal good. So in the case of the Central Library, there is a clear attempt to harness this idea in how the space was designed. As the architect described it, it would be a truly public space where people would want to come and meet, to study and relax. So the blended spaces work to create a large social space where people can eat, drink, interact, socialize and engage with each other and with the displayed archives if they wish to, as we can see here. The idea of a space where you could go and simply hang out was carried across the whole of the building, but it was very much rooted in the archive and reflects this idea of enabling visitors to shape their own experience of the space in a way that is relevant and meaningful to them. And this extends into the design of the exhibition as well. So the design incorporated interactive exhibits using electronic screens, which followed a spectrum ranging from closed interactivity through to user-generated content. Different exhibits were designed at different points along this spectrum, from the informative family history exhibit to the more participatory Manchester reflections. And certain exhibits invite visitors not only to comment on the content, but to share their own memories and stories using the digital screens as shown here.
Peter, just a couple of minutes, I'm afraid, if that's okay.
Thanks, Diana. So more broadly, Archives Plus repurposes the use of archives for new objectives that help to support users and their well-being. The archive utilises volunteers to catalogue collections, but the focus here is not on getting work done for the archive in making the catalogues, but in supporting the volunteers. So the former Archives Plus manager, Kevin Bolton, described, it's not about the catalogues, it's about the volunteers. This person has now gone and got a job. It's made a huge difference to that person's life. So volunteering opportunities are designed to help people get into work, improve their skills, to build confidence in leaving the house and participating in society. So in these different ways, archives and libraries become spaces that are vital and transformative to the lives of individuals and to society more widely. They are designed as third places to provide important social space for individuals away from their home or office. They provide exhibition spaces in which people can participate and create their own meanings. And they provide opportunities through volunteering and placements to transform individual lives and respond to social needs. So a few acknowledgements and the final slide there. Thank you.
Peter, thank you so much. Gosh, what an interesting, you've taken us to a completely different place on this, and what a wonderful representation of the power of design and accessibility and so on. But I am curious to know, does the exhibition itself actually discuss issues around health and well-being? Could you just very briefly comment on that, if you would?
Yeah, it does. So there are probably two ways that it does this, I think. One of them is there's a section of the exhibition that looks at Manchester communities, and it tells stories and images, tells stories and shows images of people from a diverse range of communities in Manchester. And I think the design here is to encourage, to give a sense of belonging, so that people coming in will see their own stories represented. And if they're not included, then people are encouraged to bring their own material, which can be digitized and included within the exhibition. So I think this did happen particularly with a group of women who were interested in the carnival that's very famous in Manchester, but wasn't reflected in the exhibition, and they were encouraged to bring their own photos in that could then be added. But the exhibition also includes displays on health and living conditions in Manchester from a more historical perspective. So there are records around workhouses, asylums, refuges, and social and welfare committees that examined living conditions in Manchester, particularly in the 19th, early 20th century. So a large part of the exhibition examines those and encourages people to think about that and to reflect on how that was then, but also perhaps to think about attitudes and changes to health and well-being in the present as well.
Oh, thank you. That's so helpful. That's really, really interesting to know.